In the spring of 1899, a United States Army officer named William Abercrombie came back to the beach at Port Valdez on the south coast of Alaska and found a graveyard that had not been there when he left. He was a captain in the 2nd Infantry. He had stood on that same gravel the year before, at the foot of the Valdez Glacier, watching men drag sledges up onto the ice. Everybody blamed the glacier and the cold, but what put most of those men in that gravel was neither one, and his report to the War Department says so plainly enough. There was no question those men had passed a terrible winter. Many of them had died. Some had frozen, and a great many of them had died of scurvy. The evidence of it was the little graveyard that had grown up on the flat while he was away. Now I want you to understand who those men were, because it is not who you would think. In 1898, about 4,000 men joined the stampede into that country, and the road in was over the Valdez Glacier. They had been sold a route. A steamship company advertised it as the all-American route to the gold fields, a clean short way in that dodged the Canadian passes and the Canadian customs men. It was neither clean nor short. The glacier was roughly twice as long and twice as steep as the handbills said. It was moving. It had crevasses in it that would take a man and his sled and close over the top of him. That is the danger everybody expects. Ice, cold, a fall, and running out of grub 100 miles from the nearest stove. Here is what actually happened to them. The men who died in the camps above that glacier over the winter of 1898 and 1899, a good many of them were not out of food. They had food. They had hauled it up there themselves in relays over weeks, breaking their backs to get it in. It was stacked against the cabin wall while they died. Flour, bacon, beans, dried fruit, sacked and counted and guarded. They starved with a full larder. Some of them starved with a full stomach. That is a description of a mechanism rather than a turn of phrase, friend. There are 2 of them, and both are well understood now, and neither one was understood then. My grandfather ran trap lines on the Clark Fork before the roads came into this valley. The men who taught him did not get this out of a book. They watched partners come apart over a winter, and they handed down rules about fat and about greens that sounded like superstition to anybody who heard them cold and were not superstition at all. I am Orson Rusk. Let's take this apart properly. There are 6 pieces to this. Most men who have thought about it at all have the first 2 roughly right. The 3rd and the 4th are where the old manuals go soft, and where a fair amount of what gets said today is simply mistaken. The 5th is a story about how a cure that worked was found, written down, and then mislaid for the better part of a century by people who thought they were being scientific. But the 6th is the one that got dropped out of the teaching altogether, and it is the piece that explains why one group of people crossed those same latitudes for thousands of years without any of this touching them, while well-funded, well-equipped, well-provisioned expeditions fell to bits in a single winter. We will get to all 6. Stay with me. And before I go on, if this is the sort of thing you want more of, put a subscribe on it. Not for my sake. Because of what we are digging back up around here, you will want the next one. Now, the myth I am after here is the oldest one in the whole business of feeding yourself, and it is so plain that most people carrying it have never noticed they picked it up. The myth is that food is food, that if you have enough of it, by weight, by the sack, by the pound, then hunger is handled, and you will not die of it until the pounds run out. Do the sums, load the sled, and you are safe for as long as the arithmetic says. It comes to us in about 4 flavors. The first is the one I have just said. Enough is enough. Weight is safety. The second is the meat version, and this one is still repeated in survival talk today. That a man can live on what he shoots. That meat is the complete food, and a good hunter can hold out indefinitely. The third sits underneath the second, and it would surprise most people alive now that the fat is the part you throw to the dogs, and the lean red meat is the good part. That belief is a modern one rather than a frontier one, and it would have got you laughed at by any trapper who wintered in this country. And the fourth is the one that put those men in the ground at Port Valdez. That scurvy is a sailor's disease, a sea disease, salt beef, long voyages, no land in sight for 4 months. Nothing whatever to do with a man on dry ground with a wood stove and a full store of provisions. Every one of those is wrong. Not old-fashioned, not partly right. Wrong. So let's start with the ton of goods, because it is the cleanest example I know of a careful precaution aimed squarely at the wrong target. By the autumn of 1897, the Canadian authorities had a problem on their hands. Men were coming over the Chilkoot Pass and the White Pass into the Yukon with a blanket, a frying pan, and a great deal of confidence. So the Northwest Mounted Police set a post at the summit and made a rule. No man crossed into Canada without a year's supply on his back. Roughly 1 ton of goods all told, of which better than half had to be food. You have seen the photograph even if you do not know it. The single file line of men on the golden stairs cut into the snow of the Chilkoot, stretching up out of the frame. Every one of those men was walking that pass 10 and 15 and 20 times because nobody carries a ton in one trip. Look at what was on that list. A typical outfit ran to 400 pounds of flour, 150 pounds of bacon, 125 pounds of beans, 25 pounds of rolled oats, 25 pounds of dried potatoes, 75 pounds of dried fruit, sugar, salt, baking powder, tea and coffee, and a tin of mustard. As a calculation of energy, that outfit is sound. Flour and bacon and beans will carry a working man through a northern winter with room to spare. The men who drew up that list were no fools, neighbor. They were doing the only sum anybody on earth knew how to do at the time. Because in 1897, the other sum did not exist. The idea that food carries specific trace substances and that the absence of one of them by itself will take a healthy man apart was not settled knowledge. Vitamin C was not isolated until the late 1920s, and it was not confirmed as the thing that stops scurvy until 1932. That is 35 years after the Chilkoot. So the mounted police at the top of that pass weighed the outfits. They counted pounds, and a man could pass that inspection with a full year of food strapped to his sled and be carrying a diet that would have him down by March. That is the first piece, and it is the one everything else hangs on. Weight is not nutrition. Calories are not nutrition. A full storeroom tells you exactly one thing, which is how long you can keep eating. It tells you nothing at all about what happens to you while you do. The second piece sounds like an old wives' tale right up until you look at what the liver actually does for a living. Here is the claim. A man can eat all he wants, until he is full, 3 times a day, of good, clean, fresh meat and starve to death while he does it. The name it goes by came out of the North Country, rabbit starvation. The French-Canadian trappers had their own word for it, mal de caribou, the caribou sickness. It is not folklore. The mechanism is understood, and it is not complicated. Meat is protein and fat. Lean meat is very nearly all protein. When you eat protein, your body strips the nitrogen off it in order to burn what is left, and that nitrogen comes away as ammonia, which is a poison. The liver has to convert that ammonia into urea so the kidneys can pass it out. That conversion has a ceiling. The liver can only run the cycle so fast, and the rate is set by your body, not by your appetite. Where exactly the ceiling sits is argued about, and I am not going to pretend to a precision the research does not have. The reviews put it somewhere around a quarter to a third of your daily energy coming from protein before you are pressing hard against it. Go past it and hold there, and the nitrogen backs up in the blood. Now put that man in a cabin in March. If lean meat is all he has, he cannot eat enough of it to meet his energy needs without going past what his liver can process. And if he holds back to stay under the ceiling, he is not eating enough to live on. There is no setting on the dial that works. That is the trap, and it is a closed one. Lean meat with nothing alongside it has no way out. The symptoms come up the same way in every account, and they arrive fast. First a heaviness, a headache, a dullness, a hunger that eating does not touch. Then, inside about a week, the bowels let go, which makes everything worse, because now he is losing water and salts on top of it all, and running through the whole of it, a specific, raging craving. Not for food, for fat. Charles Darwin wrote about this in 1839 in his account of the Beagle voyage. He quoted the Arctic surgeon John Richardson, who had seen that people living a long while on lean meat develop an insatiable desire for fat, and can eat a great quantity of pure fat with no nausea at all. Darwin's own note was about the gauchos of the Pampas, who lived on beef for months on end and did perfectly well on it. He worked out why. They ate a very large proportion of fat, and they particularly disliked dry, lean meat. The man who nailed it down was the Arctic explorer Vilhjalmur Stephenson, who spent years living with northern peoples and eating what they ate. In 1928, he put himself into a supervised study at Bellevue Hospital in New York and stayed on it for a year. At the start, they held him on lean meat only. Within a few days, he was symptomatic. They gave him fat, and it reversed. He then spent the rest of the year eating meat, fish, fats, and organ meats, and stayed well the whole time. I will be straight with you about the limits here. How fast this kills a man outright, and whether the killing is done by the nitrogen or by the plain starvation underneath it, is still argued over. What is not argued over is that lean meat on its own will not sustain a human being, and that fat fixes it. Now here is the part that ought to stop you cold. The animals are leanest at precisely the moment the man is hungriest. A white-tailed deer going into December might be carrying close to a quarter of its body weight as fat. By March, that is largely gone. One study that followed deer through the winter found that in early winter, the weight they were losing was almost all fat, and by early spring it was hardly any fat at all, because there was scarcely any left to lose. What they were burning by then was their own muscle. Caribou run the same calendar. Everything in the north runs the same calendar. And a snowshoe hare barely carries fat at any time of year. That is why the name of the thing is rabbit starvation, and not moose starvation. So look at the shape of a bad winter. The flour gets low in February. The bacon went long before that, because bacon is the fat and the flavor both, and it is the first thing everybody eats. So the man takes his rifle and goes out. And what he brings back in March is the leanest meat of the entire year at the exact moment he has nothing left to put beside it. He eats until he is full. He gets weaker. He cannot make sense of it, and neither could anybody else in that camp. That is the fat problem. Now the other one, because a man could solve the fat problem completely, could be holding his weight and eating well, and still be 4 weeks away from his teeth coming loose in his head. Scurvy is a deficiency of vitamin C. Ascorbic acid. Almost every animal on this continent makes its own. A dog makes it. A deer makes it. Somewhere far back down our line, the last step in that machinery broke in our ancestors and was never repaired, so we have to eat it, every few weeks, forever, or we come apart. Here is what it is for. Collagen. Collagen is the structural protein of the body. It is the rope and the mortar, both. It is in your skin, in the walls of your blood vessels, in tendon and ligament, in the gum, in the little membrane that holds each tooth in its socket, in every scar you have, and in the matrix that bone is laid down on. To build collagen that holds its shape, the body has to modify the protein chain as it is made. There is an enzyme that does that modification, prolyl hydroxylase, and that enzyme requires vitamin C to keep working. Take the vitamin C away, and the enzyme stalls out, and the collagen coming off the line is weak. It will not hold. And here is the piece that is hardest to take in. Your body is not finished with your old injuries. That cut you took when you were 19 is not a job that was completed and filed away. Collagen turns over. The body is continually pulling down old collagen and laying in new, all your life, everywhere at once. Every scar you carry is being actively maintained right now by a crew that never stops working. So when the vitamin C runs out, the demolition carries on and the construction stops. That is why scurvy does the things it does, and the things it does are genuinely strange to hear about if you have never read the accounts. The gums swell up and go spongy and bleed, and the teeth loosen in their sockets. Blood vessels leak, so the skin comes out in dark blotches and bruises where nothing struck it. The legs go dark and hard and swollen, which is where the old name black leg comes from. There is bleeding into the joints and down into the muscle, so a man cannot straighten his knees. Old wounds that healed clean years back open up again on their own. Bones that were broken and knitted come apart along the old line. The accounts from the Alaska rushes describe it about as plainly as it can be described. Bodies and limbs turned black. Hair fell out, and a man could pull a tooth out of his own head with his fingers and hardly feel it go. And the dying is often sudden. A man is up and about, feeling like he might be on the mend, and he bleeds somewhere inside where nobody can see it, or his heart simply stops. Well in the morning, dead by dark. The accounts read the way they do for a reason. Now the timing, because the timing is the whole reason nobody worked it out. A healthy adult carries a store of vitamin C in the body. Take it all away, and the symptoms do not show for at least a month, and more usually 2 to 3 months. 2 to 3 months of feeling perfectly ordinary while the reserve drains out. And the amount that stops the whole thing from ever starting is about 10 milligrams a day. That number is the cruelty in this. 10 milligrams. A raw potato would cover it. A cup of the right tea would cover it. The Klondike is full of this. Jack London, the writer, was 21 years old when he went in the autumn of 1897, and he wintered in a cabin at the mouth of the Stewart River, about 80 miles above Dawson City. By spring, his gums were swollen and bleeding, his teeth were loose, and there were dark spots coming up on his skin. He lost 4 front teeth to it. He got hold of some potatoes and a lemon, which took the edge off, and when he reached Dawson, he was told at the hospital to get himself to fresh food as fast as he could travel. That hospital was St. Mary's, put up in Dawson City in August of 1897 by a Jesuit priest named William Judge. He took in men with frostbite, typhoid, dysentery, and scurvy through the worst of it, and Dawson called him the Saint of Dawson for it. He died there himself in January of 1899 of pneumonia at 48 years old, and the whole town turned out to bury him. And this was not new to the North. 50 years earlier, the California diggings had the same thing on a far larger scale. Estimates of how many men died of scurvy or its complications in the California rush run as high as 10,000, with the worst of it in the winters of 1848 and 1849. I want to be honest that those are estimates built up from physicians' accounts and death registers, and historians differ on them. But the contemporary accounts are not vague at all. A physician writing in 1850 put it down to exposure and to diet, and noted that fresh meat was rarely to be met with and vegetables were seldom seen, so hard bread and salt meat made up the principal bill of fare. One thing before I go on, and then I will not mention it again. Everything I have gathered, the water, the fire, the cold, the food, all of it, the way it was actually done, and what it cost the men who got it wrong. It is written down in one book, over at orsonrusk.com. 90 methods, plain, with what each one does and what it does not. It is there if you want it. That is all. Now back to it. The fourth piece is a calendar, and it is the reason nobody in those camps ever worked any of this out. Both of these things run on a delay, and it is the delay that hid them. Rabbit starvation takes about a week from the day the fat runs out. Scurvy takes 2 to 3 months from the day the last fresh food is eaten. So think about a man arriving at a diggings in September. He eats reasonably well through October. By November he is on flour and bacon and beans and nothing else. Nothing happens. December, nothing. January, nothing. And he feels fine, and he is working hard, and he has proved to himself that he is a tough man who knows what he is doing. February, he is tired in a way that sleep does not touch. March, his gums are bleeding, his legs are dark, the flour is nearly out, and the deer he shoots have no fat on them at all. Everything arrives at once, in the worst month, in the hardest weather, at the far end of his strength. And the cause of it is 10 or 12 weeks behind him and looked like absolutely nothing at the time. So what did they blame? The cold, the damp, the bad air in a crowded cabin, the overwork, the water? Anything at all that was happening that week, because that is how people reason, and it is how you and I reason too. And they had a rule that positively steered them away from the answer. Scurvy is a sea disease. Everybody knew that. So a man on dry land, in the mountains, next to a stack of provisions, with a stove going, does not have scurvy, because scurvy is what happens to sailors. While all of this was going on in the mining camps, something worth knowing had already happened out at sea and then been thrown away. The fifth piece is about how a cure gets lost. In 1747, a naval surgeon named James Lind ran what is generally counted as one of the first controlled clinical trials in the history of medicine, aboard the Salisbury. He took 12 scorbutic sailors, split them into pairs, and gave each pair a different one of the remedies going about at the time: cider, vinegar, seawater, elixir of vitriol, a paste of garlic and mustard seed, and to one pair 2 oranges and a lemon a day. The pair on the citrus recovered. Nothing else did much of anything. Lind published it in 1753. It took the Royal Navy until 1795 to issue lemon juice as a daily ration across the fleet, and when they did, scurvy in the British Navy very largely stopped. That is one of the great practical victories in the whole history of medicine, and here is what happened to it. The Navy switched from Mediterranean lemons to West Indian limes. The reasons were about supply and about cost and about the limes coming from British colonies. But West Indian limes carry considerably less of the vitamin than lemons do. Then the juice got pumped through copper tubing and stored in casks with air in them, and copper and air are 2 of the things that destroy ascorbic acid fastest. So the ration was still being issued. The barrel was still on the ship. The paperwork was immaculate, and the stuff in it had almost nothing in it anymore. Scurvy came back. It came back on the polar expeditions of the late 1800s on ships carrying the official remedy. And the doctors of that generation, who now had germ theory and were finding microbes behind one disease after another, went looking for a microbe. Some of them proposed that scurvy was an infection. Some proposed it was a poisoning from tainted tinned meat. The old answer, which had been correct, was written off as a superstition of a less scientific age. It was not until 1918 that somebody finally tested the Navy's lime juice properly on animals and found it had virtually no power against scurvy at all. 150 years of knowing, and then not knowing. That is the thing I would have you take from this above any single fact in it. Knowledge does not only travel forwards. It can be found, written down, printed, issued as an order, and still be quietly lost inside a generation by men who were certain they were improving on it. Which brings me to the sixth piece, the one nobody teaches anymore. Fresh raw meat is a source of vitamin C. Not a large one. There is very little of it in plain muscle. But there is a real and usable amount in the organs and in the skin, and it is destroyed by heat. When researchers went out to a seal hunting camp in the Canadian Arctic in the 1970s and measured the food people were actually eating, the numbers came back plain enough. Raw ringed seal liver ran to about 35 milligrams of vitamin C in every 100 grams. The thin outer skin of the beluga whale, what is called muktuk, came in higher still, near enough 40. Boil either one of them for 10 minutes, and most of that has gone out into the water, and the amount a man needs in a day to keep scurvy from ever starting is about 10 milligrams. So a modest portion of raw liver carries him past the line. A few ounces of muktuk carries him past the line. Every single day, without anybody thinking about it, without any word for vitamin existing in any language on earth. And that is the answer to the question I put to you at the start. The peoples who lived in those latitudes, on a diet with no fruit and no vegetables in it for 8 and 9 months of the year, did not get scurvy. Meanwhile, parties of outsiders came into the same country with tons of provisions, ships, funding, doctors, and the confidence of an empire, and came apart in one winter. The difference was not toughness, and it was not luck. The outsiders cooked everything. They boiled it and fried it and salted it and threw the cooking water out the door, and the cooking water was where the vitamin had gone. They were being careful. The care is what did it. And this cuts through the other half of the myth as well, the one about fat being the part you throw away. The northern way of butchering treats the fat and the organs as the valuable portion and the lean muscle as ordinary. That is 2 problems being solved at once by people who had watched what happens when they are not. There is a plant half to this, and it is older still. In the winter of 1535 going into 1536, Jacques Cartier had his ships frozen in on the St. Charles River, under the rock where Quebec City stands now. Scurvy went through his crew. Of about 110 men, 25 died. Cartier learned from an Iroquoian man named Domagaya that a decoction made from the bark and needles of a certain evergreen tree, which they called aneda, would put it right. His men drank it, and the dying stopped. That is 1536, friend, 211 years before James Lind, and 396 years before anybody knew what ascorbic acid was. The same knowledge, friend, shows up all over the north. Spruce bark and spruce needle tea turn up again and again in the accounts of the Alaska rushes as a thing men took for scurvy, alongside raw potatoes, and it was not folk nonsense. Spruce needles genuinely carry vitamin C. Now, one last thing, and this is the part I see people get wrong when they stop halfway. Solving one of these 2 problems perfectly does nothing at all for the other one. Take pemmican. Pemmican is lean meat, dried hard and pounded to a powder, then mixed with rendered fat, roughly 1-to-1 by weight. It is the finest traveling food the fur trade ever produced, a direct and deliberate answer to rabbit starvation, engineered by people who had lived through it. It solves the fat problem completely, and it has no vitamin C in it whatsoever. The drying and the rendering see to that. Which is precisely why Arctic expeditions that ran for months on pemmican and biscuit, doing everything right by the standards of their day, still went scorbutic. They had fixed the first thing and never known there was a second, 2 mechanisms running on 2 different clocks, and one larder that looked full the whole way through. So, let's put it back together. Those men above the Valdez Glacier were not idle, and they were not stupid. They hauled their outfits up a moving river of ice because every guidebook and every outfitter told them to carry a year of food. And they carried it, and they guarded it, and they rationed it properly. They died anyway, inside of it, because the food they carried was a calculation of weight and heat and nothing else. Because the fat ran out before the meat did. Because the game they shot in March had nothing on its bones. Because the only vitamin C they ever had was dried, boiled, and thrown out with the water 3 months before it mattered. And because every one of them had been taught that scurvy is something that happens to sailors. Food is not food. Weight is not nutrition. A full store room only tells you how long you can go on eating. A man cannot live on lean meat, no matter how much of it he eats, because his liver has a ceiling and there is no way around it. Fat is the part that keeps a man alive up here, and the ones who threw it to the dogs did not last the winter. Scurvy is not a sea disease. It is a land disease, a cabin disease, a mining camp disease, and it takes 2 to 3 months to arrive so that nobody ever connects it to what they stopped eating back in November. 10 milligrams a day was all it ever took, friend, and it was sitting there in raw liver and in spruce needles the whole time, and boiling took it straight back out again. The people who lived in that country year-round had all of that worked out without a single word of chemistry, while the men who came in with the tonnage and the paperwork did not. The glacier took the blame, neighbor, and so did the cold. What did the actual killing was sitting quietly in the sacks against the wall, being exactly what it was advertised to be, and not one thing more. So here is the whole of it, friend, and this was never really about scurvy. It was about the difference between food and nourishment, and about a man who can be full every single day for 3 months and starving the entire time. That is not doom talk, neighbor. Civilization is fine, the shelves are stocked, and there is an orange in your kitchen right now. The only thing missing is the part of you that knows what to reach for when the shelves go empty, and that part has not gone anywhere. It is only untrained. So do one thing this Saturday. Find out which of the things growing within a mile of your house carry this, whether that is spruce or pine needles, rose hips, dandelion, or the inner bark of a birch. Learn one of them properly, friend, and learn that you steep it and never boil it, because boiling takes out the very thing you went looking for. Your great-grandmother knew 3 plants that would carry a family through to April. Somebody just did not get the chance to hand that down to you, and that is what I was here for tonight. Now tell me down below, friend. What did the old people in your family eat in late winter when the root cellar was down to nothing? Sauerkraut, spruce tea, rose hips, raw liver, or something I've never heard of? The answer that comes up most in the comments is the one I build the next video around, and that is genuinely how I pick them. Next time we are going after the 25 meals frontier families fell back on when the crops failed outright, including the one that kept more people alive than any other and that almost nobody would recognize as food today. That is the whole of it. No trick to it once you know.